work together against the United States and build a new United Socialist system. However, without mobilization, a mass-based revolution would not take off. The Vietnamese Revolution was mass-based, but surprisingly, the bulk of literature associated with it, with some outstanding studies apart, viewed such mobilization myopically. Given the geographical, economic, political, psychological, and socio-cultural differences between the South Vietnamese guerrilla forces, how the front statically proved so efficient baffles historians even today. A good number of books have come up, mostly by Western writers, but are often biased. The perusal of their writings throws up an objective understanding of the NRF tensile strength, its strategy, and extent of success against powerful forces, and forms the content of the present study. Vietnam is a country, very important country in Southeast Asia, and from very beginning of its existence it suffered a repeated aggression and subjugation. It has to its credit a history of struggle and wars against the Chinese, the French, the Japanese, and the American forces. They are doers war they waged against them, but they never forgot that these people were alien ruling over them. Now, they rose time and against this alien domination and managed to establish their identities as a separate country within Asia. 19th century Vietnam, like other Asiatic countries, recorded Europeans vis-a-vis the Chinese, then Japanese, and in course of time, in order to meet the given problem, they developed their own traditional way to establish themselves or to organize themselves into a different organization under the banner. First it was ICP, that is Indo-Chinese Communist Party, thereafter Viet Minh, and finally at the time of their partition in 1900, after the Geneva Agreement of 1954, Vietnam was partitioned into the two parts, and North Vietnam and the South Vietnam, and it provided that the country should be reunited following the general elections in July 1956. The North Vietnamese expectations for the holding the referendum were denied by the president of the South Vietnam, Ngo Dinh Diem, with strong US support. US Secretary of State John Foster Dulles said that imposition of the communist system on Southeast Asia should not be passively accepted, but should be met by united action. But the Vietnamese accepted this partition with a deep bitterness and gave them uncontested control of only half of the country. As Wilfred Bachet described in his book, North of the 17th Parallel, Saigon at the end of the 1954 was a city of gangsters and assassins, of shots, knife thirst, and a struggler caught in the dark, a city where people spoke in whispers and disappeared without leaving a trace. Beautifully lit and decorated shop front displayed luxury articles, but little which had any relation to Vietnamese needs or purchasing power. The major part of the blames for turning the autocratic system in the South Vietnam that belonged to the US policymakers of that time, as the US perception could see no further than a conflict between the forces of freedom and communists. They never prompted the South Vietnam to introduce reforms on the socio-economic front. I'm skipping some portions. And as a result, a very small party emerged on 20th December 1960 by a group of opposition, and the person who were behind this establishment of the party Nguyen Tan Ta Path, and it was popularly known as National Front for the Liberation of South Vietnam, and in Vietnamese it is called Mat Tran Dan Toc Giai Phong Mien Nam Viet. The founding principles of this NLF were to provide a new forum to approve the old political setting, habits and commitments, and replace with new ones. The new society to be based on a socialistic pattern of group membership, organization, and idealistic commitments with socialist background. The pertinent point of this study is how the NLF scored a victory over the technologically advanced adversaries, the United States. The US endeavor were more backed by the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization partners, the France, Britain, Australia, New Zealand, Pakistan, Thailand, and the Philippines, with supply of man and material. Taiwan and South Korea also lent their support. The NLF, on the other hand, fought single-handed and yet emerged victorious. No doubt, it had the support of the communist countries, the then Soviet Union and China, but the Soviet Union, though it supplied some strategic weapons, never sent its army. The main strength of the NLF was its ideological posture, strategic perception, and effective mobilization. It considered peasants as an important and effective vehicle of its success. It established underground camps, initiated training programs, and undertook relevant educational literary campaigns and programs of social and economic.
Please conclude.
Oh. Vietnamese revolution might be said to have begun with the nationalism and ended with the communism. Two successive generations of Vietnamese fought for the national independence, but had achieved no success other than to keep the revolutionary spirit alive. Their failure, however, prepared the way for the NLF cadre, who finally emerged as liberators of the country. The liberation of South Vietnam, the period from 1960 to 1975 is considered symbolically the most crucial period of political development in the history of the Vietnam. The victory was unprecedented, extraordinary, and unique. It had to fight against the superpower besides its internal enemies. The Saigon regime had superior technology, sophisticated training, and multinational forces, and the vast resource at its command. With all those advantages, however, it was routed. In the history of the Afro-Asian world, the NLF victory was truly of unparalleled. However, the period spanning 1.5 decades, the dynamics of this liberation of South Vietnam is manifestly described as truly a second independence after the first one on 2nd September of 1975.
Thank you very much. Please stay back here. Do you have some questions or comments? Anyone of you? Now I have a little comment to make.
Yeah, please.
Respond to it. I'm no expert of Southeast Asia. Just generally.
Sorry, it's just for your certificate.
Okay.
I'm sorry for disturbing you, but it is for to get your certificates.
Also mostly all the way.
So that
These are the old guards. So I was saying that you want to ask some question? That Vietnam emerged as the epicenter of resistance to Western imperialism in general, and American imperialism in particular. And of course it faced China also, and to an extent it was very difficult for small Vietnam to live.
Yeah.
Huge China, looming large over its head. But then again, what we see at the present time, that Vietnam closing up to Western countries,
Yeah, fastest
especially
growing
United
economy.
States of America, and still
Yeah.
away from China. So this is again the turn of the last century and first decade of the present century. A lot of upheavals went there. You took the name of John Foster Dulles. He was an out and out imperialist, and he was against any kind of third world
Yeah.
national movements. I being a man of West Asia working on it, I would know that how angry he was when Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, and he was the person instrumental in getting these three powers, Israel, Britain and France, for the tripartite Egyptian nation. Egypt was very close to India because of Nehru, Nasser, how many those days and all that. So it's a nice paper. If you want to sum up the things what I said, we have to
Okay.
one or two sentences and all that.
Sure, sure. Now, what I find today, sir, because in 1963, that is a very, very important year in which we find that one of the American president, John F. Kennedy, was assassinated. There was a lot of trouble started in the Vietnam itself. In many months, they committed self-immolations themselves against the atrocities of the Americans. Soviet Union was so much so helpful to the Vietnamese in order against to keep the Americans away from the area. They themselves got disintegrated in the modern time we find. China, who helped very much to the Vietnamese, also we find thereafter their relations got disturbed, and now the Vietnamese very boldly they are sending a message in Asia itself like Asian tigers. So what I mean to say that because of this war, 3 million people died alone in the Cambodia during the Pol Pot region that was also associated with the war. 50,000 Americans lost their lives, it is still fresh. Some more than 1 million Vietnamese lost their lives of their no fault. And I think in the present, the past we cannot just forget, in which Vietnamese tremendously have come up, and now they are giving a very tough competition in the region against though the both the countries, the China and the Vietnamese believe the same ideology, but with the different their interest.
Thank you very much. Nice paper.
Thank you, sir.
Now, friends, we have the blueprints of the presidential address at last, and I would request my colleague Ashok Kumar to read it. I'm sorry, Mukesh. You can present the précis of the book. You can go there.
Thank you, sir. Actually, this is the presidential address by Professor Manoranjan Mohanty. He is a political scientist with expertise on China, Indo-China relations, and now in his absence, Professor Shamir Hassan Sahab is chairing the session, and he is an expert on West Asian history and West Asian politics, and he has got a big name. What to say? Now I am going right on to read the paper. Alternative Historiography, Dan Cheng's Geo-Civilizational Paradigm. All cultures are intercultural. They have evolved through a process of interaction among people of different regions, especially neighboring regions, exchanging ideas and practices over time. Sometimes this interaction might appear to be a one-way traffic, but when viewed over a long time span, the interaction may actually turn out to be two-way. This two-way process may not always be a benign exchange. It may have moments of truth for one side or the other, or of the attempted imposition of a value system by a victor, facing resistance by a victim. But seen through the historical process, the totality of the experience presents the many dimensions of the interaction as a struggle, as mutual complementarity, or a charm. Ultimately, the interaction constitutes a process of mutual learning. The history of civilization is thus a dynamic process of intercultural evolution. When a nation, a state, or a people of a geographical region, uniqueness of its culture, ignoring its intercultural formation, a major dimension of history is missed. Herein lies the distinction between the geopolitical paradigm that governs much of the state policy and international relations in the modern era, and the geo-civilizational paradigm that Tang Chang advocates, and which is his main contribution to the study of history and culture. In this theoretical note, written incidentally not by a historian or a cultural studies expert, but by someone interested in the methodological questions involved in the study of terms of discourse, we will first stress the significance of Tang Chang's enterprise and then discuss the meaning of the term interculturalism and geo-civilizational paradigm. This is then illustrated by reference of Tang Chang's studies of Indian-China interactions extending over 2000 years, interaction which he characterized at various points with the descriptors Sino-Indic civilization, Himalayan streams, Simian civilization, Himalaya sphere, and finally China, of 5,000-year odyssey. The Tang Chang's perspective is then considered as a contribution to the emergence of an alternative historiography, a significant perspective. Based on a lifetime of intensive research on India and China, Tang Chang has developed a geo-civilizational approach to analyze historical process. In India and China, 20 centuries of civilizational interaction and vibration. Tan and Zheng 2005 year after referred as 20th century. Okay. Tang Chang and Zheng Yincheng present a perspective of what can be called creative interculturalism, a process of cultural interaction that enriches the creative potentiality of all the participating units. This perspective not only explains the nature of the India-China interaction over the 2 millennia period, but is a generalist theory that can apply to the understanding of the civilizational history of humankind on a global scale. That's where the importance of this perspective and of Tang Chang's contribution is located. The significance of Tang's perspective lies in the fact that intellectual history in the modern world is premised on theories of cultural conflict based on a gradation of cultures and civilization. European colonialism put European culture on a high pedestal and, using its economic and military power, promoted a knowledge system that propounded the superiority of Western civilization. In the course of the anti-colonial struggle, many philosophers and thinkers of Asia questioned this assertion. In India, M.K. Gandhi presented a thorough critique of Western civilization in his Hind Swaraj in 1909. Rabindranath Tagore had a different response. Tagore upheld the strength of Eastern values and thought and evolved a universalist paradigm for the liberation of humankind. In doing this, Tagore deeply reflected upon the cultural and civilizational legacies of Asia, particularly of India and China. To institutionalize that reflections, he set up in China Bhavana for the study of Chinese culture in Vishwabharati University, Santiniketan, and invited Tan Yun-sen to lead it. Tang Chang pursued the Tagore quest further. carried forward his father's vision and delved deep into researching the historical interaction between India and China. His finding from his lifelong investigation was that India and China have engaged in a mutually enriching cultural interaction very different from the conquered relationship that produced the superiority of the colonial culture. This intercultural perspective challenges much of the colonial era literature and its subsequent versions. The theories of culture that informed the policies of the colonial regimes also influenced foreign and security policies during the Cold War. Max Weber's theory of the differentiation of cultural systems that favored the growth of capitalism and those that inhibited it has been a dominating framework guiding the understanding of the modern era. Weber's work, The Religion of China and the Religion of India, showed how these two cultural systems possessed values and behavioral features which were in sharp contrast with those of the Protestant societies of Europe. Therefore, according to the Bavarian framework, not only capitalist industrialization but also liberal democracy were unlikely to succeed in China or India, or for that matter in Eastern societies in general. Much of this has been disapproved in practice in recent decades as both capitalism and democracy in their local variants have continued to grow in these and other non-Western societies. As against the Bavarian theory of culture, Tan Cheng's notion of interculturalism sees the plural and dynamic character of all cultures. One doesn't have to strain and reinterpret Confucianism to demonstrate that it is compatible with the capitalist entrepreneurial development underway in contemporary China. One doesn't have to trace the origin of capitalism to the evolution of Vaisya caste and the Baniya community in India. An alternative perspective on how civilizations evolved would enable one to capture trends in society resulting from interaction from groups engaged in different traits in production process within a region or across regions within a country. Interculturalism can avoid the pitfalls of cultural determinism. I will go on the section on critique of xenocentrism, and then I will read out the concept of interculturalism and geocivilization, and then I will try to read out the last portion. During the Cold War, a formulation that drove the imagination of Western and particularly American academics as well as policymakers was xenocentrism. Xenocentrism, a term which was coined by the eminent American historian John King Fairbanks. China was believed to see itself as the Middle Kingdom. The literal English translation of the Chinese term for China, Zhongzhuo, considered itself as the center of the world and implying that it has a sense of superiority which is the rest of the world. The Opium War was waged by the British to destroy that sense of superiority and defeat Chinese resistance to Britain's opium trade and to establish British control over much of the Chinese economy. The Chinese Revolution, according to Fairbanks, was mainly a nationalist movement to regain lost honor. Tan Cheng had presented a detailed critique of this whole argument on xenocentrism in a two-part article in China Report as early as 1973. Going into the genesis of the term Zhongguo, Pingjia, and Danju, and the terms used for foreigners, Yi, he refuted point by point the alleged hierarchical and non-egalitarian xenocentric view of the external world, which, as he put it, had justified imperialist aggression on China and Cold War politics. Western imperialist aggression on also served the US Cold War politics, but thanks to the intellectual monopoly that the West enjoys, the xenocentrism argument persist in the Western and laterally the global mind. Now that China has risen to the status of a world power, this notion is used by many to show that the Chinese rulers as well as the people had always had a Middle Kingdom complex. That notion provides the theoretical backdrop to the notion of a China threat, which many security analysts propound. Even Xi Jinping's call to realize the Chinese dream of rejuvenation of the Chinese nation has been put in the framework of Sinocentrism by Western analysts. Xi Jinping's active global policy after the 19th Party Congress of 2017, especially the Belt and Road initiatives, have been interpreted by many commentators as the reassertion of the Middle Kingdom complex, which is also subject of much debate. Deng Chen and many others have provided much historical evidence to substantiate the point that the concept of Middle Kingdom referred to the Central Kingdom, which consolidated power by defeating the surrounding kingdoms in China in the 3rd century BC. If interculturalism challenged the theoretical propositions governing colonial and Cold War discourses and policies, it is in fundamental opposition to the clash of civilization thesis of Samuel Huntington, which has guided the thinking of Western leaders during the era of globalization and post-9/11 mindset that governs US policy. According to him, the world has seen conflicts between princes, nation-states and ideologies in the past. In the future, it is likely to see the clash of civilizations. Civilization defined as the highest cultural grouping among people. Huntington talks about the civilizational fault lines that have become manifest between Western and Islamic civilization and the Confucius-Islamic connection that has emerged to challenge Western interests, values and power. Suffice it to say here that Huntington's thesis that Western civilization was bound to come into confrontation with the Islamic Confucian civilization betrays an extremely narrow concept of civilization with boundaries which according to him seem impregnable. The Huntington thesis has several assumptions about history which can be questioned. Politically, it may have turned out to be a self-fulfilling policy, misguiding the US invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan and their global counter-terrorism operations, but already that phase of history seems to be waning. The emergence of many regional formations such as BRICS as catalyst of global transformation defies the civilizational fault lines that Huntington talked about. The decline of Western domination of the world is a historical trend not as anticipated by Huntington, who had theorized on the bounty of the fall of the Soviet Union and the tide of global expansion of the market economy. As against the Huntington thesis, Tangent presents a view of interculturalism that is based on the connected histories of peoples and the regions of the world. This history highlights the interaction among human groups across the globe and the movement of ideas and theories, values and technology, and natural products and arts. Thus, Tangent's notion of interculturalism is a theoretical tool that challenges the cultural theories of colonial and the Cold War eras and joins the present battle for a cultural understanding of the future of humanity in the 21st century. With the upsurge of cultural identities all over the world, as people seek political power to govern themselves and protect their language, culture and dignity, it is very important to comprehend the notion of interculturalism and the politics underlying the cultural discourses of the past and present. Now I will read out the portion, the concept of interculturalism and geocivilization, and after 2 paragraphs, I will approaching towards the end of this paper. Interculturalism, without a hyphen between inter and culturalism, emphasizes the fact that the interaction between cultures has produced a new levels of synthesis between the cultures. A simple definition of culture is that it is a pattern of belief, values and behavior of a body of people. A civilization, simply understood, is a cultural milieu of a large number of people that extends over a long span of time and a relatively wider space. A civilization is also about beliefs, values and behavior, but those which acquire a long presence in history and take form in music, art, literature, architecture and rituals embodying worldviews. A civilization has in it knowledge system that inform humans about relationship with nature and among humans. We shall use these working definitions to proceed with our analysis, knowing fully well that definitions of such concepts are always problematic. It is useful to note the differences between intercultural and cross-cultural on one hand and multicultural on the other. Western anthropology engaged in a cross-cultural studies during the colonial period to understand the uniqueness of cultures in different parts of the world, mostly in the colonies of Asia and Africa. Many of these studies were motivated by a scholarly pursuit to discover the cultural traits of communities. Many were guided by Western curiosity to learn about cultures other than those of the home countries of the scholars. However, most of them were meant to provide the intellectual input for colonial governance. One thing was common among them, namely, they considered the objects of their study as bounded cultures, communities, which has various specific features in their physical and behavioral existence, being closed until they were exposed to the outside world, first by invading or migrant communities, and then the colonial administration. Cross-cultural perspective were pursued after colonies got independence and became an important exercise for policy making during the Cold War era. The Area Studies Program, as well as the Comparative Developmental Studies programs promoted the U.S. Social Science Research Council, promoted by the U.S. Social Science Research Council, were a package of cross-cultural studies during the entire Cold War period. The bonded view of cultures formed an important element of the social system theory of Talcott Parsons and the political system theory by David Easton, in which a system was defined in terms of boundary. According to them, an appropriate political culture was a precondition for the successful practice of democracy. The Weberian theory, which has been extended to explain why the US type of pluralist democracy faced problems in non-Western societies such as India and China. In all these cases, the cultures of studied communities were considered as closed and stagnant until they were exposed to immigrants or invaders. On the other hand, the intercultural perspective considers all cultures as dynamic products of interaction. Rather than a monolithic view of culture, interculturalism sees multiple trends, even contradictory elements in a culture. While the cross-cultural perspective emerged during the colonial era, multiculturalism came to the fore in a different era. The context was the phenomenon of the rising non-European, non-white migrant population in the US, Canada, and Europe in the last 2 decades of the 20th century. The Euro-American population slowly came to terms with the presence of the Asian, African, Arab, and Latin Americans. Since Canada and the US were countries of European migrants who colonized the land of the natives, in the new context, they needed labor from other countries for which they had to evolve a framework to absorb the migrant population. There was one trend from the white supremacists who were determined to maintain the purity of their culture. The broader trend was to find ways of coping with the new situation. Multiculturalism emerged in this context as a theory enabling recognition of the cultural identities of different groups composing society. Recognition and difference were the two key terms. The US was not to be seen as a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant entity, but as a multicultural society where blacks, Catholics, Muslims, Sycanos, Asians, and Arabs were entitled to similar privilege. Multiculturalism was a response to the identity upsurge of many minorities who were to be assured that their cultures were not in danger. Multiculturalism too had an inbuilt belief in the hierarchy of cultures that allowed its practitioners to maintain subtle form of dominance over immigrant identities. It did not give equal respect to all cultures, though it provided some space for the cultural practices of various groups. It no doubt acknowledged areas of confluence, dynamism, and the evolution of cultures. However, it did not grasp the fact that all cultures are product of interaction among cultures. As a result, we not only saw the decline of multiculturalism in the post-9/11 West, we saw the virtual assertion of the superiority of Western civilization on the one hand, propagated through the globalization of capital, and on the other hand, the worldwide drive against terrorism led by the US. Thus, the crucial element in the meaning of interculturalism is a process of mutual exchange of ideas and practices with respect for each other. Note that each other. This is the characteristic pattern of the 20th centuries of India-China interaction that Tan Cheng has analyzed. More importantly, interculturalism is an element of the civilizational perspective on human history. The human habitat is important in Tan Cheng's geo-civilizational paradigm, but as he puts it, it is not a horizontal spatiality that is a spread in one direction backed by military power. It is a spatiality that is multi-directional and with each one influencing the other and all gaining spiritually or culturally across regions. This is why, from Tan Cheng's perspective, countries like India and China should regard themselves as civilization states rather than nation states. This is the message from the 2 millennium long historical interaction between India and China. So I am skipping some of the pages and coming on to the last section, alternative historiography and recasting cultural questions. Tan Cheng's works belong to the developing field of an alternative historiography of China and India, which questions several established notions. For instance, China as a stagnant society until it was exposed to the West. Second, the modernization paradigm. Third, the periodization based on such parameters. And of course, fourth, the much paraded idea of xenocentrism. The new formulation on connected regional history in the evolving process of globalization during the past 200 years have enriched this further. The field of xeno-Indology, once pursued as a separate area of classical studies in Europe, is now growing steadily, discovering interconnections among civilizations and challenging many popular notions such as that of the Greek of India-China contact from the 12th to the 18th century. They take the cultural turn in social sciences in the 1980s into a new realm, going much beyond, questioning the economic determinism of classical Marxism and the power of politics to redirect cultural development claimed by superpowers and rising nations. They present a comprehensive outlook of how civilizations have emerged in human history and of the current stage of civilizational development in different parts of the globe. Keeping these intellectual trends in view, we can derive several important premises for pursuing cultural discourse in the 21st century. First, all cultures have evolved in interaction with other cultures. Therefore, each culture deserves respect. India-China studies have shown how the two civilizations invited each other to reciprocally learn and grow. Xi Xiaolin and Tan Cheng, among others, have asserted how the identity of each was shaped by the other. The interdependence of cultures is a historical phenomenon that can be applied to every part of the world. Invasions, crusades, colonialism, etc. do what to assign superiority to the culture of the victor. Edward Said's seminal contributions showing how colonialism created Orientalism to characterize Eastern peoples and their cultures was complemented by Ngui Wa Thiong'o, who pointed out how colonialism reshaped the mind of the colonized and denied the subject even the right to name things. This trend of decolonization of knowledge is now substantiated by the alternative historiography of Tan Cheng and others. Their proposition is that the cultures of people everywhere must be taken seriously and with respect, acknowledging the linkage between one culture and another. Second, all cultures have plural, diverse, and even contradictory elements. Tan Cheng shows this by noting the effects of Buddhism on Confucian and Taoist practices and vice versa, varying from period to period and from place to place. The coming of Islam to Western China and of Christianity to Eastern China had their complex effects. How all of these interacted with popular religions and the culture of local communities, including what are today called minority areas, are a subject of much new debates over recent decades. This view contests Bavarian characterizations giving fixed characteristics hostile to capitalism and democracy, or Fairbank's concept of xenocentric worldview. Each country had multiple regional and cultural streams, each had by today's standards many humanist and democratic traditions as well as many authoritarian, illiberal practices. China and India have not only glorious and valuable traditions, discoveries and inventions, but also oppressed social structures and customs such as foot binding of women and untouchability. Third, civilizations and cultures have a history of continuous dynamics. Contrary to the near frozen stereotypes of Chinese or Indian civilizations, which many Western historians have presented, they were constantly absorbing new elements, improving production systems, rearranging social relationships, and finding new ways to cope with the natural environment. Much of this took place in response to interaction with other cultures, even more when regions and groups interacted with each other within a larger territory. Dan Cheng's thesis on interculturalism and his geo-civilizational paradigm, despite their historical grounding, have a strong normative dimension, as all social science researchers have. The tradition of historiography associated with Fairbank too had normative dimensions, characterizing Eastern societies in particular ways to advance Western interests and policy perspectives. The geo-civilizational paradigm, however, frankly advocates dialogue among civilizations and peoples on the basis of mutual respect and mutual learning. Many Western scholars are currently advocating such dialogue. The project initiated by Ji Jinlin and Tan Zheng presents a huge challenge for historians and social scientists to investigate historical sources deeply and with objectivity, to innovate methods of discovery and analysis, and to fill many gaps that remain in the proposition. The yin-yang complementarity that Tan Zheng sees in the 20th centuries of interaction between India and China illustrates an alternative perspective on human history, from self versus other to self and self. The South African term in the Zulu language, Ubuntu, which I am because you are, which Mandela and Desmond Tutu revived as a framework of mutual living, conveys the same idea. Colonialism created the self versus other categories, creating the metropolitan values of Europe as the self and the colonies as the other. That has become the typology for reviewing several binaries in social science, social analysis. All ruling groups see themselves as self and the ruled as the other. The concept of modernization motivated the newly independent countries to become more like Europe and the US. The so-called social aspect process of Sanskritization meant lower castes becoming like Brahmins. This very method of hierarchical classification is under question all over the world. And the last paragraph of this address is, everywhere, all oppressed groups and regions are seeking self-realization and self-determination. Thus, the new historiography points at a new moment in the civilizational history of humankind, where history is being reconstructed with the aid of new methodologies and fresh theoretical categories. This new stage in the changing terms of discourse on global history has profound meaning for human future. To that process, Dan Zheng had made a monumental contribution. Thank you.
And you have just heard a very substantial presidential address as presented by Professor Mukesh. Now, it's time for lunch, I think.